In the 3rd century BCE, two great powers stood on opposite shores of the Western Mediterranean, each hungry for dominance. Rome, a rising republic built on discipline, law, and citizen soldiers, controlled the Italian peninsula and was steadily extending its influence southward. Carthage, a wealthy trading empire founded centuries earlier by Phoenician settlers on the coast of North Africa, ruled the seas through its merchant fleets, its silver mines in Spain, and armies of hired mercenaries drawn from across the ancient world. For generations the two had coexisted, even signing treaties of friendship and trade, but the island of Sicily, lying almost exactly between them, close enough to see from both coastlines on a clear day, would shatter that fragile peace forever. When a band of Italian mercenaries known as the Mamertines seized the Sicilian city of Messina and then found themselves besieged, they made the fateful decision to appeal to both Rome and Carthage for protection at once. Neither side could resist the opportunity such a request presented. Rome's Senate, wary of a rival empire gaining a permanent foothold so close to Italian shores, voted narrowly to intervene despite having no real navy of its own. Carthage, equally unwilling to lose influence over the island it had long considered part of its sphere, dispatched forces to secure Messina first. In 264 BCE, the collision of these two ambitions ignited the First Punic War, a brutal conflict that would drag on for 23 exhausting years and permanently reshape the balance of power across the ancient Mediterranean world. Rome had never possessed a serious fleet, yet necessity forced remarkable innovation. Roman engineers salvaged a wrecked Carthaginian warship and used it as a blueprint to build an entire navy in a matter of months, equipping their ships with a boarding device called the Corvus, a spiked gangplank that let disciplined legionaries turn naval battles into infantry combat. Despite catastrophic losses to storms, shipwrecks, and inexperienced crews that cost hundreds of vessels and tens of thousands of lives, Roman persistence and manpower eventually wore Carthage down. By 241 BCE, an exhausted Carthage sued for peace, surrendering Sicily and agreeing to pay a massive war indemnity over the following decade. Rome had won its first war beyond the Italian mainland, but the deeper rivalry between these two Mediterranean giants remained far from settled. Humiliated but not broken, Carthage turned its attention to Spain, where a talented military family known as the Barcids rebuilt the empire's fortunes through conquest and the exploitation of rich silver mines. Among them rose a brilliant young general named Hannibal Barcas, a man who had grown up despising Rome and who, according to later Roman writers, swore a solemn oath as a boy never to be a friend to the Roman people. When tensions over the Spanish city of Saguntum, an ally of Rome, escalated into open conflict, war broke out once again in 218 BCE. Hannibal responded with one of history's most audacious military gambits. Rather than face Rome's navy at sea, he marched an entire army, including a contingent of war elephants, overland through hostile Gaul and across the treacherous, snow-choked passes of the Alps directly into Italy itself. The invasion stunned the Roman world. In a series of devastating engagements at the Trebia River, at Lake Trasimene, and most catastrophically at Cannae in 216 BCE, Hannibal repeatedly outmaneuvered and annihilated Roman armies that vastly outnumbered his own forces. At Cannae alone, using a masterful double envelopment tactic still studied by military strategists today, Hannibal's forces surrounded and destroyed a Roman army of roughly 80,000 men in a single afternoon, one of the deadliest days in ancient warfare. The catastrophe shook the Republic to its foundations, and panic gripped the city of Rome itself. Yet Hannibal lacked the siege engines, reinforcements, and political support among Rome's Italian allies needed to strike directly at the capital, and the city, though bloodied and terrified, stubbornly refused to negotiate or surrender. Rome adapted through patience and sacrifice. The general Fabius Maximus adopted a deliberate strategy of avoidance and attrition, harassing Hannibal's supply lines and refusing pitched battles rather than risking further annihilation, a cautious approach that earned him the nickname the Delayer. Meanwhile, a gifted young Roman commander named Publius Cornelius Scipio carried the war to Carthaginian strongholds in Spain and eventually into North Africa itself, threatening Carthage's home territory and forcing Hannibal to abandon his long Italian campaign to defend his homeland. In 202 BCE, at the decisive Battle of Zama fought on Carthaginian soil, Scipio, who would forever after be honored with the title Africanus, finally defeated Hannibal in open battle. Carthage was stripped of its overseas territories, its war fleet, and its independent right to wage war without Roman consent, reduced overnight from a rival empire to a subordinate state. Even stripped of its military power, Carthage's steady commercial recovery over the following half-century unsettled ambitious Roman politicians, who still viewed the old enemy with deep suspicion. The Senator Cato the Elder became notorious for closing every speech he gave in the Senate, no matter the subject under debate, with the same ominous declaration that Carthage must be destroyed. His fixation reflected a wider Roman anxiety of the era, a belief that as long as Carthage continued to exist and prosper, however diminished militarily, it remained a lingering symbol of defiance and a potential future threat to Roman supremacy in the Mediterranean. Rome ultimately seized on a convenient pretext in 149 BCE, when Carthage defended itself militarily against raids by the neighboring Numidian kingdom, without first securing Roman authorization, a technical breach of their earlier peace treaty. Rome responded by demanding a series of increasingly humiliating concessions, culminating in an impossible ultimatum that the Carthaginians abandon their coastal city entirely and resettle inland, far from the harbor and trade routes that had made their civilization wealthy for centuries. When the people of Carthage refused this demand, the Third Punic War erupted, though in truth it bore little resemblance to a conflict between equals. It was, from its opening days, a calculated siege of annihilation against a city that could no longer field a proper army. For nearly 3 years, the citizens of Carthage held out against overwhelming Roman forces, melting down household valuables to forge makeshift weapons, and fighting street by street with desperate resolve even after their outer walls had been breached. In 146 BCE, under the command of Scipio Aemilianus, adopted grandson of the earlier Scipio Africanus, Roman legions finally broke through the city's defenses in brutal house-to-house fighting that lasted days. Carthage was systematically burned to the ground, its surviving population killed or sold into slavery, and its territory absorbed directly into the new Roman province of Africa. Ancient accounts claim the ruined earth was ritually salted so that nothing would ever grow there again, though most modern historians regard this vivid detail as a later legend rather than a documented historical fact. Regardless of its literal truth, the underlying message to the ancient world was unmistakable. Carthage, once a rival empire spanning the western Mediterranean, had ceased to exist. The Punic Wars accomplished far more than the elimination of a single rival power. Together, these 3 grueling conflicts transformed Rome from a modest regional republic confined to the Italian peninsula into the unrivaled dominant force of the entire Mediterranean world. The territory, wealth, and hard-won military experience Rome accumulated across more than a century of near-continuous warfare against Carthage laid the essential groundwork for its later expansion into Greece, Spain, North Africa, and eventually a vast empire spanning 3 continents. Hannibal, despite his ultimate defeat at Zama, is still remembered today as one of history's greatest military tacticians, and his innovative strategies at Cannae remain closely studied in military academies around the world more than 2,000 years later. The utter destruction of Carthage also left a lasting cultural memory of just how ruthless Rome could become whenever its survival, or even just its sense of security, felt genuinely threatened. What began as a relatively minor dispute over a besieged mercenary garrison in a Sicilian port city ultimately ended, more than a century later, with the complete and deliberate erasure of an entire civilization from the Mediterranean map. Carthage's harbors, once crowded with merchant ships from across the known world, fell silent, and its once thriving population vanished into slavery or scattered exile within a matter of weeks. It stands today as a stark reminder of how limited regional conflicts between rival powers can gradually escalate into wars of total conquest and annihilation. Historians still return to the Punic Wars as a case study in how ancient states rose and fell on the strength of alliances, logistics, and sheer resolve. The echoes of this long struggle still resonate as one of antiquity's most defining contests for supremacy.